Hey, hi everyone. Welcome to SaaSBoomi BTS podcast. I have Varun with me, and we have a special guest, Kalyan Verma. Hi Varun, hi Kalyan.
Hey Arvind, hey Kalyan, good to be here. In case you folks are wondering what's up with my voice, I think I have COVID for the fourth time, so I'll be speaking less. I'll still be present. I'll be asking a bunch of questions, but I'll be speaking much lesser to your good pleasure because Arvind definitely is a better host than me. So we have Kalyan over here. Kalyan is someone who I really look up to. He was part of a SaaSBoomi GrowthX cohort, and I've seen him run his company in probably one of the most disciplined manners. And before I talk too much about him, I think it's best you hear directly from Kalyan. Kalyan would love to firstly, thanks for accepting very graciously this podcast. And we'd love to know your history, your story, like where did you start from, what got you into the SaaS world. And most of this episode is going to be focused on behind the scenes on your marketing story. So we'll then post your intro, grill you, literally, so to speak, on a lot of marketing questions and the successes that you've had. Over to you, Kalyan.
Thanks so much, Varun, Arjun. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure talking to you guys. I've learned a lot from you guys. So yeah, I'm really glad that we're able to chat again. So yeah, I'll give a quick intro on Almabase and how we started. So basically, this story goes all the way back to my college days. So I went to college here in India at NIT Warangal, right? And what happened when we were in college was so this is a 4-year engineering degree. And like after 2 years, the college had increased tuition fees significantly for the third year. And a bunch of my classmates were being forced to drop out because they couldn't afford the tuition fee anymore. Right. And we were like, man, like this doesn't make any sense. Like there has to be a better way around this. You can't like drop out after 2 years, especially like in a premier engineering college. So we ended up basically like, okay, for this particular problem, what can we do to help? Right. So we ended up reaching out to alumni. We had 30,000 alumni at the time. We're just like, okay, let's just call them. Like, this is the easiest thing we can do. Obviously, we got lots of rejection. Like everybody said, what are you even talking about? Like, and eventually one alum said, okay, I'll give you the money, but you need to form a foundation where I can give the money. I'm not going to deposit in your bank. So we ended up creating a nonprofit foundation when we were in college. Luckily, that year we got enough alumni to support the students and nobody dropped out, right? And we kept continuing to run that foundation for about 6-7 years until the college sort of merged it into the college, right? But during this journey, I mean, again, like I graduated, started my full-time job at Goldman Sachs, was happy with my life, but like I was really passionate about this, right? I was like, this is what gave me true joy, right? And so this was always in the background, but never really thought of it as a tech startup per se, right? So what ended up happening is a lot of other colleges in India started reaching out to us saying, hey, like you ran this foundation, sounds like it's really successful. How can we do this at our college? And what we realized is fundamentally, this is a tech problem because you have like 1 or 2 people in alumni relations in the college and you have 30,000, 50,000 alumni to engage, right? And there is no way to do that. I mean, the human connection is important, but without tech, you can't scale, right? So fundamentally, it's a tech problem. So we're like, okay, maybe we should build a company out of this. That's how Almabase started about 7 years ago.
Very rebellious of you, Kalyan. Like, that's the first thought that comes to my mind. Like, if I was running a college, I'd be both happy and scared that I'm a student. And a wonderful selection of names. So, product marketing is fairly close to my heart. Almabase is just wonderful name that can be positioned extremely well in this category. So, kudos for selecting that as a name as well.
It was just the first .com that we got, which had a decent name because like right from day one, even though the focus was India, we knew that we wanted a .com, right? Because, we knew that at some point we'd want to go global, but yeah, so it was the first easiest name where we got a .com and we picked it. And I still remember my co-founder, Sri, and I designing the logo just on a whiteboard, just like the one behind you, Varun.
Yeah.
We wrote it, and then the 3 dots below it saying alumni, students, and faculty. And
You saw the Amazon box next to you, and you were like, Good. Let's make it easy. Let's just do this, right?
Yeah.
I know that's behind the scenes, right? Yeah. I'm just guessing over here. The first question I usually ask, and something I'm very curious on, because in a lot of organizations, uh, the organization isn't designed intentfully. And having seen Almabase as part of SGX, I know there's a lot of intent and thought that has gone into both designing and running the organization. Generally, I'm very curious on like what's the evolution of the marketing department in a company that we are talking with, or startup that we're talking with. Where does it like? What does the org chart look like when they started, and what has that evolution been to now? If you could just walk us through like first, uh, you can say your first awareness that you were doing marketing, and now you have like a marketing department to like the current org chart of marketing.
Yeah.
And if you started from your college, I think it'll be earlier India market and then US market, how it evolved would be really good. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think maybe what I'll do is I'll just quickly at a very high level paint the picture of the journey of the company so far. And then like parallelly sort of talk about the marketing arc, right? So we started in India, like you said, Arvind, and that unfortunately we stuck with it for like about 3.5 years, trying to bang our heads against the wall, saying like someone will buy this. But like essentially what happened is all the top tier colleges bought it, right? Like so we had some of the IITs, we had some of the IIMs, like IISc Bangalore, etc. But like beyond that, when we went to tier 2, everybody was like, "What are you talking about? Like, what? Spell the word alumni for me, etc." Right? Like, so that happened, and then we slowly started getting interest on our website from the US. Right? And the original hypothesis for us was that look, everybody in the US seems to have figured out how to do alumni relations and fundraising. It's a proper industry, and the original thought was we need to be pioneers in India. Right? But then we realized that the market's just not open for this right now, right? And because we started getting some interest on our website from US colleges about 2018, right? Like that's when we started seeing, or that's when we started exploring the US market. That's when the pivot happened. Luckily for us, we made the pivot very quickly and very clearly saying, okay, now the focus is all US. We're not going to muck around with some India, some UK, some Australia, some US. This is like US is the biggest market. We'll just focus on that. So we did that. And then we started, like when we did that, we started getting a lot more leads with higher ACVs relative to India, right? So we started understanding pricing and the pricing power and things like that. Then I think the next inflection point for us was like, we had to crack how to scale our pipeline. And that happened with Outbound for us, right? So we obviously explored inbound. We looked at other kinds of marketing channels, but Outbound is what really gave us the control and the scale that we needed, right? And then about 2021, when we did the LGX program, is when we pivoted into like proper ABM and not just simple kind of outbound. And that really changed the game for us in terms of how we were able to then scale the pipeline even further, one notch further. So that's been the evolution of how the company's journey has been. And like in terms of how the marketing org has evolved, as you can see, like we've been very sales led, right? Like, so the SDRs are the primary sort of outreach that generates the demand for us, right? And so we started with primarily the SDR team. We didn't even have a single person whose name was marketing, right? Like for a long time, right? It was just SDRs and AEs, right? So SDRs would do outreach, whatever leads came, AEs would close. So that was the whole setup for a long time, right? And then what we realized is, I mean, SDRs got really good at this game, but like it was high volume kind of thing, but we had very limited market, right? So there's only 4,000 four-year colleges in the US, right? And there's only about 5,000 independent schools that have all the way to 12th grade, which is where Almabase becomes relevant, right? There's roughly about 10,000 units that we can sell in the US, right? It's a pretty limited market, right? What we were doing with our outbound approach was we were just like unrolling 100 contacts every week into like a sequence, and we were running out of contacts pretty quickly, right? So then we started taking an intentional effort around marketing, where we hired our first person, right? Her name was Manshi. Her job was primarily content, right? So we started with trying to generate content which would act as air cover for the SDR outreach, right? So that's how we thought about marketing even in the beginning. It wasn't even about inbound. It wasn't even about content driving leads or anything like that. It was about providing air cover for the SDRs, right? Then when we pivoted into like a full-blown ABM structure, now we have I would say about 15 people in the ABM team, right? Which is a combination of SDRs and marketing. And the way marketing is divided now, we have a couple of people who are focused on really top of the funnel kind of content that SDRs use in their emails, right? There's one person focused on pure brand awareness activities like webinars, etc. And again, the SDRs drive their prospects to those webinars, right? And another engagement touch point. And then we have a couple of people who are only focused on bottom of the funnel content, right? So all of marketing is primarily, at least in my view, viewed as enablement for the sales function, right? So that's broadly how we are structured.
One interesting observation that I've seen, and Arvind, you would have also seen, it's actually being talked about a lot in the US SaaS ecosystem, that outbound sales, at least the SDRs, should report to the CMO. And for markets like yours, and I think it's actually a perfect use case for that the only possible way for you to drive good awareness is through your outbound SDR activity. And it can't be just blind activity where you're just emailing them, hey, will you buy a product? We'll sell you for the X price. It
To be what you're doing now is marketing is reporting to sales in a structure.
right now,
I think that's how it is the way he's explained it.
I implicitly, if you go purely and you treat outbound SDRs as sales, yes. But that's where my counterpoint comes in, that outbound SDRs, in my opinion, especially for markets like Kalyan, belong in marketing. So, because they are the ones who are driving awareness across the market. There's for Kalyan to drive awareness otherwise is a extremely difficult task, because the search volume would be low, and the decision makers, and I'm presuming over here the events would be also very few, because alumni as a thing, it's not like a movement yet, at least. So there might be some small events here and there, but it's not like you wouldn't see a dream post for this audience. So outbound over here in this case actually are truly part of marketing, even though they might be labeled as sales, in my opinion.
I want to double click on it, Varun. So definitely, I'm a marketer who would want SDR team to report it to marketing, because logically lead gen is the gear of marketing, right?
Yep.
So obviously SDR team should report it to marketing team, so it makes sense. But the accountability of closure comes from sales.
Correct. That's why I said only SDRs, not
Yeah.
EEs.
So that's where this
Because what your SDRs are doing in this case is they are actually, in a way, trying to create movement of the enablement content that marketing is creating. So they are your distribution channel for that content. They're educating the market. So the sales is, yes, a byproduct of this, but it's mostly awareness and education in this case. So that's why they are more of a marketing role versus a sales role. I think in commoditized markets, where the product's fairly standard, that's where, even if you label an SDR to be part of a marketing, I think that's a mistake, because that's more sales, because people know what to expect. They're mostly, if they want to buy something, they know the expected price points, they know the basic features that they do expect. So there's lack of education and awareness. It's just slight level of awareness that you'd be doing. In this case, it's much more.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. I think that's a great point, Varun. And for example, if you look at the kind of content that our team generates right now, right? A lot of it, for example, is just called spotlights, which is basically, we'll go to a university, right? An SDR will do a call just saying, hey, I want to learn what you're doing and what's working, what's not working, right? From an alumni perspective, right? And we just record that whole thing. We just like take good content out of it and put that out as a spotlight saying, okay, Davidson College did this amazing alumni event. Here's what you can learn from it, right? And then we distribute that content to everybody else using our SDR saying, hey, like if you're doing a reunion later this year, here are some good tips from Davidson College, right? So basically the SDR team generating as well as distributing that content, but the marketing team basically like, sort of enabling all of that to happen.
And you're coming across as a thought leader, because talking about all like not so much. They're not competition over here, but they're peers. So you're talking about their peers and what best practices they're doing. So you're kind of like leading from the forefront, doing the thought leadership and educating the market. So this is how categories are created. If the market's large enough, this is how categories end up being created.
It also, because of the market, it's very clear. It's very targeted niche market. He knows this is what the TAM is. These are the accounts I have. He can directly go use Outbound SDR like straightforward. If it's a horizontal product where everybody's a customer, maybe the strategy might change.
Niche with lack of awareness and cohesion. I think that's where there's an added filter. You might end up in niche markets where the role that the SDRs are doing isn't really as much as in education. Let's say there's a search volume for a certain market, bottom of the funnel search volume. And then the market's fairly well established. It's niche, but still fairly well established. So the search volume is almost non-existent. And it's much more of an educative outreach, benefit selling process than, let's say, a help desk software, for example. Uh-huh.
Maybe to share one thought on top of what you just said, Varun, is if you look at sort of the messaging that has worked really well for us from an email perspective, right? All our emails start with, I mean, the first email in every sequence typically starts with something like this, right? Which is, let's say I'm reaching out to Arvind, right? I would say, hey, Arvind, I saw this thing that you did for your alumni on your Facebook page. Here's a screenshot where I was viewing it, right? Good job, great job. I would love to learn how you pulled this off, right? Like that's literally all that the email says, right? And that's how we start the engagement, and then sort of like understand, okay, what's your tech stack? What are the gaps? Like, and then see if we can make a sale. So it's not at all about here's what we do, here's what we can sell you.
Not understand at all. Interesting. Quickly, I would want to move on topic. So you told you started with the India market, and then you realized the market was not mature enough, and then you moved to US market. So how was the journey? Like how did you go upon getting your first few customers in the US?
A great question. A lot of nerve-wracking moments there, but a couple of stories that I remember, which are really, I thought like were very helpful for us in our journey as we made this pivot. I mean, imagine, and by the way, there were still a few conferences, right? Like nothing of the scale of Dreamforce, like Varun pointed out, but like still a few conferences. So the first thing that we did is as soon as we got some interest from some colleges in the US on our website, we started traveling to these conferences, right? We were like, let's be there, let's set up a booth, let's figure out what they're even talking about, right? Because this is such a foreign market for us, even though we were very passionate about the topic, the US was a different beast, right? So we landed there. We spoke to lots of people at conferences. That was our first real like understanding of the market. But we realized, man, there is so much more that we need to learn about the day-to-day job of these people before we can get our positioning, messaging, product, packaging, all of that right. Right. So what we did is this is probably borderline illegal, but like I created a fake email ID called J Emmanuel. Again, the thought was it needs to sound American enough for the first name so people can just say it easily, but also has to have some Indian backing because I'm going to be speaking on voice.
Or Mexican. You could pass off as in Mexican.
Possibly. So I created this fake email ID, and what I would do is I would basically email like anybody who was in the job of alumni relations and fundraising at a university. And I would say, hey, I'm a final year student at San Jose State University. I'm going to graduate in a few months. I want to build a career in alumni relations because it looks really interesting. Can you talk to me for 30 minutes just to understand what your day-to-day job looks like? And this is not Kalyan. This is not Almabase. This is purely J. Emmanuel as a student. And I got like 30 calls in 15 days, right? And that really turned the screws in terms of like us understanding their day-to-day job, right?
It's such a clever hack. You see, everyone has their stories like these. Even I do, creating these identities. But I think what's very special about this approach that you have is that you posed as a student. And usually, I mean, we're busy in our run-of-the-mill jobs, imagining like just an alumni relationship officer busy in the run of the mill job, kind of like an existential crisis. What am I doing with my life? And then suddenly someone actually finds meaning in this career, and wants to actually invest their life in this. And they're a student. So you really want to pay it forward, and you'd almost always take that call. I think this approach of, coming across as a student is actually a very good hack for customer development, something I'm going to steal. I don't think visually I can pass off as a student, but I'm probably going to take phone calls.
Yeah, maybe you should use a better name. The pseudonym I used to use is Jack Sawyer.
I mean, you could have picked another serial killer name or something like that, right? Or when, like, is your inspiration from like Hollywood serial killer movies? Like, is that where your name picking comes from?
No, I used to do a part-time job in one call center back in the day when I was in college. So my pseudonym used to be Jack. And I didn't like the last name they chose because it was the Italic guy's name. So I wanted to use a different last name, and then I chose Sawyer.
It like classic, like you tell someone Jack Sawyer and his 50 murders, like they'd believe, yes, that's the title of the book.
Way to get a call. Like, hey, this is Jack Sawyer calling. Oops.
Oops. Yeah. So, so you've done your customer development by now, like going back on your history, Kalyan, you've done your customer development, you have fair bit of idea on the market. You've met a bunch of people in US, you've talked to these folks. Then how did you get the first US customers?
Yeah. So I think both with the conferences and some of the leads that we got on our website, which was still pretty thin at that point, we got a first, like, I think about 4 or 5 customers in the first like 5 months, right, in the US. And then what I did is I actually like visited these universities. I could still pass off as a student even in my real self back then. But I would basically go to these universities, call up my customers and say, hey, can I stay here for a week? Right? Just give me a dorm room, or I won't have a dorm. I'm going to stay outside, whatever. But most universities have like cheap dorms, right? So I would just go stay there for a week in each of these colleges. And I would basically just like sit in the alumni office. In one of the alumni offices, sat as the receptionist, right? Because that was the only chair that was free, right? But I just sat there for the entire week, just observing them in terms of like what they do, how they're doing it, where are they struggling with our software, where are they struggling in terms of their day-to-day life, right? And then visited, like they were conducting alumni events, I went with them, right? And this gave us a lot of insights into product as well, right? Along with messaging and positioning, right? So then we started developing from there, and that's when we started the SDR team, right? Once we got our first few customers, we started the SDR team. Obviously, we started the SDR team in India, but we did over the years all sorts of combinations. We had SDRs in India first, then we hired SDRs in the US, which didn't work. Then we shifted back to SDRs in India. Then the approach changed to ABM, etc. But like it's been outbound since then. And today, like, yeah, we're sort of the number 2 in terms of market share in the US from an alumni software perspective.
So actually, Kalyan, I'll tell you, this is very, very important for all the marketers listening, right? So it's important to understand the persona. What you did is actually try to understand the persona, like what's the day-to-day like you try to live in the country like the regular alumni and walk their path. That gives you a lot of understanding of like how to even target them, like what pain they go through. That understanding is very, very important to do a business. And I do not give me have the luxury to go there and be there and do it. But the idea is to understand the person. I think that was brilliant, whatever you did.
Yeah, I think, Arvind, I think it's from the limited observation I've had, it's less luxury, it's more of fear. So the fear of kind of like mingling in the American culture, not knowing what you're doing, coming across as a fool. I mean, you can watch as much Hollywood movies as you can, but when you have to live that life and converse in that and understand the puns and the sarcasm and then crack your own jokes, and then sometimes they fall flat and then recover from those. I think that's very, very, very uncomfortable thing to deal with initially. And I think one thing I hold Kalyan in a lot of respect is that maybe this was your beginner's mind, Kalyan. I don't know. You're just generally very confident at that age. I probably would have been much more scared. And one of the reasons I picked PLG as a model for my company was I just was very fearful of dealing with Americans initially. It took me years to get over that fear. And I think it's more fear versus luxury. And the more that you do this, one thing I'm seeing now versus when I started in 2001, Americans realize that Indians are here to stay and they're not going anywhere. And they're going to take over and become the CEO of all our organization. So the comfort level in, kind of like letting someone in and then explaining is much, much higher. And usually you'd see a fellow Indian working there in the office itself because of the expat community. Uh, it's far easier now to pull this off than it was earlier, and something that people should definitely double down on, especially during the early days, because you don't have many fires to fight, and you have a certain liberty of time. You have the power to mold your product, and that's actually the perfect time to do this. Not that you should stop doing this. There's a whole different story. I would talk about how companies end up in a disastrous state when the founders step away from the front line uh, and then take bad decisions, thinking that they understand the customer. One example is Mark Zuckerberg, with, at least in my opinion, with his metaverse bet. Because earlier he was interacting with his customers day in and day out. He was on the front lines, and what he thought he knew and was his genius was just basically awareness and knowing his customer. And then when you step away from the customers and you think, oh, I was a genius and I came up with those ideas and I came up with those feature requests and I executed those, and I can still do it again, and by thinking about something in my shower, it doesn't work well. I've been on that side, by the way. I've done a bunch of disastrous decisions thinking the same. It's only after those decisions fell flat that I realized that what I thought was my genius was my connection with the front line. Anyway, I'll go on and on about this. It's a long topic to discuss. So, uh,
Yeah, sorry, just before you move on, Varun, I mean, I think it's really important to like double click and double stress on this fact for all the founders listening. I think there is no substitute to spending time with your customers, at least in the first 3-4 years of the company. Spend as much time as you can with customers, because it's hard to tell some of these insights without doing that, right? Like it's hard to tell. I can't come and tell you what you're missing out, right? But basically, for example, when I was spending time at one of these universities, I realized I saw the grin in someone's or the agony in someone's face when they finished the alumni event and came back at 5 p.m. back to their office to key in the data one by one into their CRM, saying who attended, right? I saw that agony, right? And there is no other way I could have understood that. So we immediately built an integration to just get alumni to register, and then it seamlessly flows back into the CRM. Suddenly that whole job is taken away. Like, it's just so much more free time, right? So like, I think those kinds of insights you can never get without spending a lot of time with your customers.
yeah, there's a very good course that I took called Pragmatic Marketing course. And in that, one of the points that they drill into your head is a term called nihito. Nothing important happens, in the office. Everything important that needs to be done happens outside the office. So you have to get outside the office to actually understand your customer. So nihito. Nothing important happens in the office.
Although we'll keep on top this.
Yes.
So, Kalyan, I wanted to talk about this one thing which I'm actually a big fan of your CRM system. So we all know, I think me and Varun, we have asked you to share that.
The audience doesn't know, Arvind. So maybe you could describe for the audience like the killer way Kalyan has set it up.
We actually wanted to go, we did a SGX program where we were all part of a group where we share our notes, playbook, and help each other. So kind of a program. And when Kalyan casually showed us CRM discipline, the way it has been documented in kind of HubSpot processes he has set to document the whole CRM, it was mind blowing. So we literally, one day we said, let's not do anything else. We just are going to ask Kalyan to share that, and we're going to learn from how he did that. So this was one of the best setup I've ever seen. I think.
Just to add some color on this for the audience. we all know that we're supposed to take notes in our CRM. We tell our sales folks that they're supposed to like take detailed notes. Kalyan company was probably the first and probably the only one so far. Maybe Ankit comes close from Ad Pushup, where there's a certain level of cultural discipline on taking detailed essay-like notes for each interaction. And they're so helpful. You can go back in the customer journey and you can see exactly how it all started, what were the problems, what were the objections, and how that entire conversation has evolved. These are not one-line paragraphs. These are essays per call. So that was one thing that was a mind-blowing moment for me. And the second one was just the subtle nuances on the way that he had set up his pipeline. And this, I'm just using this as one example, where there are like 15 other. So the way Kalyan has set up his pipeline, you think about pipeline as those stages, and you either copy those stages from the standard ones, which are provided by your CRM. Maybe you've read a Medium article and you've seen a bunch of stages or the best way to write stage on that. Kalyan's pipeline stages stood out, and I was very curious on why they're not conformist, and they worked. So the way the entire pipeline was, it made sense. Like you looked at it, it made sense. And I was like, okay, so these are not conformist. The way that you have named your stages and the way that you're dealing with your pipeline structure. And Kalyan, I still remember your response. You said, I design my stages based on the sales process of my customer, not my process, not how I expect the customer to go through it. So not like a quote, proposal and all that, but how the customer, deals with my sales pitch. And I mapped my stages to that. So that inversion that you did was quite profound for me. It's still stuck with me. It's a framework that I've stolen. Thank you so much. We'll always give you credit. But that stuck with me. And these are just for the audience, these are just two of the things that I remember. But sorry, Arvind, I know you have a question that you were going to ask related to that data, but I just wanted the audience to know, because if you folks are struggling with the CRM, you know who to call. It's Kalyan. So yeah.
Yes, brilliant, Nebo. And so what I want to ask, like, you can explain a little bit on what made you do that as an important aspect for the sales and marketing to keep that CRM in place, and how it helped, like the impact of doing that, the discipline of bringing that kind of data into the system, like how that data helped your business. Maybe that will give awareness for our audience here and why it is important.
Yeah. Yeah. Funny story here is that like, I didn't even realize our CRM was so good until all of you said so. I was still like, man, there's so many problems. But I think that's a reminder for all founders criticizing themselves on everything, that it's okay. Right? Like we're all messing up. But the two things that I think led to why our CRM was structured so in such detail was one, it's also a reflection of my personality. I think I tend to be very meticulous. I take a lot of notes. I'm fairly structured. My memory is very poor, so I rely on my notes for everything. Right. So that's one. So it was a reflection of me as a founder. But two, I think what also happened is because we had very, very few leads, and because the market itself was so small, we just couldn't afford to screw up any lead, right? Like that, just like screwing up a lead in a very lead-rich environment is probably okay. Velocity is probably more important. But for me, like with limited leads trying to grow, we needed to make sure every lead was like on the VIP path, right? So, and the only way we could do that is by structuring it really well inside the CRM. So we could all like collaborate on like what to do next, right? In terms of how I think, like, especially there is one dashboard page in our CRM, which we look at almost every week. I look at every week. A lot of people look at it every day, right? Which gives a pretty clear sense of how many SQLs we got last week, last month, last quarter, how many MQNs, how many SQLs, how many opportunities, how much of that pipeline is converted from 3 months ago, right? Like all of that is just all visible in like one dashboard, right? Which gives amazing visibility, because even when we're setting like quotas for AEs or when we're setting targets for the next quarter, etc., it's all coming off of this dashboard, right? And we're not mucking around just like giving random numbers. Now we're just looking at this dashboard and saying, here's what we can do next quarter, right? So I think it's been like really useful to make sure everybody on the team is on the same page with respect to what's happening, right? And there is a rule that I remember mentioning to you guys that we follow internally. We basically say, and HubSpot is our CRM, by the way. And we say, if it's not on HubSpot, it never happened, right? And that mantra has really helped us because like there is no AE who will come to me in a deal review and say, hey, Kalyan, I made this call and this is what the customer said. Like I will basically immediately open HubSpot. If it's not there, we're not even talking about that deal, right? So when you do that repeatedly, people get into that discipline of like, okay, it needs to be on HubSpot. Otherwise, Kalyan will act like a whatever.
That's interesting. I used to do that with my support team. If they don't like ask them to troubleshoot, if they're not tried that, I'll ask them to go and figure it out themselves. So that's a brilliant idea to bring the discipline. Like nice. So yeah. So moving on to the next one, right? So like what are the channels really work? Like so we understand like you've been a strictly outbound centric company, and I want to understand like if there are any other channels you tried and how it helped you to scale the business from where like you're after your product market from where you are right now.
Yeah. So I think it will be useful to understand the scale that the pivot from pure outbound to ABM has given us. So what happened is, like I said, with pure outbound, we were just enrolling like 100 contacts per week per SDR into like a sequence. And like we quickly ran out of all accounts. And then we would like 4 months later, go back with a new sequence to the same set of people, right? But the problem was, how do you then scale this? Because if you are 3 SDRs doing this and they're running out of everything in 4 months, you can't hire 6 more SDRs. What are they going to do, right? Like the scaling was just a bottleneck, right? With ABM, what happened is we said each SDR only gets, let's say, 125 accounts, 150 accounts, 200 accounts, whatever, based on the size of the account. And that's all that you get, right? Unless you disqualify certain account. Then what happened is, even within that 10,000 unit universe, if you're able to actually prove out that one SDR with those 200 accounts is able to generate as much pipeline as they were doing with 100 contacts per week, right? Then you can now hire, theoretically, at least you can hire 15, 20 SDRs, all handling, let's say 150, 200 accounts each and going after the entire market, right? And what we saw with ABM as part of the SGX program, big shout out to Ankit from Ad Pushup again. Like he really drilled this discipline into us. But what happened is with the ABM approach, we saw 4x higher like open rate and 5x higher meetings booked, right? Which is out of 100 contacts in the past, right? If we were getting 4 meetings, right? Now we were getting 20, right? So now we were able to generate a lot more out of meetings at the funnel, right? So that actually like helped us scale a lot. And today, about 70% of our pipeline comes through ABM, right? And 30% is everything else, which is word of mouth and inbound and like, like Capterra and stuff like that. But that's more or less remained flat for us over the last several quarters. So the way I think about it is, okay, let that just stay flat. What we're going to do is only invest in ABM and continue to scale that further. So we recently created a partnership with Blackboard, which is a NASDAQ listed company, largest in the social good software space, like $1 billion plus ARR, very large company, right? And what this partnership does for us is now all the sales reps in their higher ed team to start with are now being trained on Almabase, which happened a couple of months ago. And they are actually selling Almabase as part of their outreach as well. So they are going to market for alumni engagement. They're going to market with Almabase, right? Which means suddenly our sales team went from like the closers went from 3 people to 30 people, right? And that's what the partnership has enabled for us. And like the crux of this is that like, the way this partnership has been set up, and this is where I think the meat of it is the salespeople at Blackboard get as much credit towards their commission, right, for selling their own product as they do for the Almabase product, right? Assuming the ACV is the same. So if they sell 20K ACV worth of some product that they built versus 20K ACV of something of our product, they get the same commission, which clearly motivates them to keep selling. And relatively speaking, I mean, Blackboard's obviously a large company. They've been around for 40 years, right? So as you can imagine, the products are old. Some of them are legacy, right? It's hard to sell, right, in today's market. Almabase, on the other hand, is obviously modern, built more recently, like, is much more easier to sell, right? And obviously the salespeople are then starting to really pick it up and move. So like that's giving us a lot of scale from a pipeline perspective at this point, but hopefully will convert into a lot more revenue growth as well.
Is it possible for you to tell us how did this partnership actually happen? Because partnering with NASDAQ listed company with $1 billion ARR and getting them to do this while you're a small or a medium sized company in India. I don't think there's another parallel example for this. Is it
Yeah.
possible for you to explain?
Yeah, I'm happy to share. And I think the fun part of this whole thing is that I was recently at a conference after this partnership signed, and we were doing a joint booth. Almabase and Blackboard were doing like a joint booth at the conference. And the sales reps, one of the sales reps was there she's been there for 27 years now, right?
Wow.
She's like, Kalyan, I don't know what you did. In my 27 years at Blackboard, we've never got to sell any product that was built outside of Blackboard's walls. This is the first time we're selling a product that was built outside. Right. So this is the first for Blackboard as well. So it took a lot of co-creation to be able to get there. Right. And a big shout out to Chris Crackler, who was the GM of higher ed at Blackboard. He and I sort of started looking at this about a year ago. Right. So it took almost 9 months to get this done. Right. Started looking at this about a year ago. And we started to think about like, hey, what would it take for us to collaborate and think about it? I think the core framework that we used is win-win-win, which is win for the customer. First thing, how do we make it a win for customer? How do we make it a win for Blackboard? How do we make it a win for Almabase? Right. And I think for anybody else trying to do this, the one thing that's really critical is having a strong champion, right? Having a strong champion internally who has the right kind of authority, who can actually move this forward is really critical, because otherwise, like sitting on the outside, it's really impossible to move things in a large org, right? So having a good relationship and creating the win-win-win situation, saying, how do we all win from this, right, is what I think the crux of the matter is. And that's what's helped us towards this partnership.
How did you meet Chris?
So we've been Blackboard partner to the typical sort of ISV partner for a few years now. And funnily, like I've never met him, right, until we started talking about this. So I just happened to, I have this thing where like I go to the US very frequently, right, just to meet some of these people, right? I find it even like 1 week, 1.5 week trips to be very effective because, like you said, nothing happens in the office, right? So I went
Nothing
to
important happened in the office.
Nothing important happened. So I went to Washington, DC, and basically just emailed him again saying, hey, we've been partners for a long time. Do you want to spend 60 minutes? Can we just, I'm happy to obviously meet outside your apartment, wherever you are, etc. And yeah, so he ended up meeting. So like, it just kicked off from there. Again, like in classic Almabase style, it was a cold email, not probably semi-cold, but yeah, that's how it started.
Very impressive. I think the takeaway that I have at least is that even if you have a small relationship with an important partner, you need to constantly and proactively be thinking on how can I maximize this? How can I double down on this? Versus just taking for granted. A lot of times what happens is you might have a prestigious company as a partner. You'd put their logo up on your website. Maybe you talk about it on the events, but you aren't really and truly maximizing that relationship.
Yeah.
And I think that requires a conscious effort to do that. Something that you've done. Kudos for that. And something that others should keep in mind.
Yeah, the data was very clear for us, right? Like even before the partnership, 60% of our customers were Blackboard customers, right? So like if I had to handpick one partner that I would want to double down on, it was clearly Blackboard. Thankfully, that worked out.
Wow. I wonder if Dream11 would allow me to bet on whether this is going to lead to an acquisition.
Anyone's guess.
So, yeah, everyone go ahead.
Sure.
If your connection holds up.
Yeah. So, Kalyan, so see, alumni network. So like, I want to start with this one question, right? I think only you can answer that. What is the number one reason an alumni network is disengaged? Your opinion from your experience of that.
Yeah, I think it starts with, so typically what happens is when you're a student, you're highly engaged with your university, obviously. You're in that fabric every single day, every single waking minute, right? Once you graduate, that moment onwards, the relationship is very different because the college doesn't put an intentional effort in trying to keep you engaged because their core job is to actually educate students, right? So they shift focus back to their current students, right? And you slowly start to get disengaged purely out of like not having any need in that relationship, right? And then what happens, which is where things break, is the only time they reach out to you after that, especially in the US, is like, hey, like we're running a fundraising campaign, open your wallet, right? Which you're like, dude, like you haven't spoken to me in 10 years and suddenly you want my wallet. Like that doesn't make sense, especially for millennials. Like that relationship, it just doesn't sustain, right?
It's very transactional.
It's very transactional. So the whole crux of our product is about how do you maintain that relationship at scale with all of your alumni by personalizing with some of the stuff that we allow on the product without putting in a lot of effort to be able to do that, right? So that's how we add value.
Awesome. So if you had to pick one college, like if you want to be an alumni of one college in the US, which college would you choose? Like, which is your favorite one?
Yeah. So if I were to pick in India, by the way, I know you didn't ask that, but I would pick BITS Pilani. BITS uses our product. They're amazing with respect to alumni engagement, like the way they nurture their entrepreneurs, the way they nurture their alumni overall. It's amazing. So I would pick BITS Pilani, drop of a hat. In the US, there is a small private liberal arts college in California called Thomas Aquinas College, right? I went there once. It's part of my customer discovery, right? The person took me to 4 of their classes while the classes were happening, right? This thing blew my mind, right? Like, so what happens there is every single class is basically a round table, right? There are no like instructor led on the front and then everybody sitting on one side. Every single class is a round table where the professor is somewhere in that round table, right? And the rest of the students are around it, right? And you just have a discussion, right? Here's what I think, here's what you think, etc. Right? And that's how you learn every single class, right? What was amazing about this college for me was one, that teaching methodology. So that was awesome. I would like, man, like I would love to go here. But the other thing that was amazing is that this is a purely need blind college. And what that means is you have to apply and they will admit you. Then they will ask you, how much can you pay? So then based on that, they basically calculate the gap between how much students are able to pay this year versus how much they need. And they give that goal to the fundraising team saying, okay, go raise this money, right? To fill that gap. And because of that, the alumni donation participation rate is 60%. The average US university is 8%, but 60% alumni give back because they feel so grateful for the opportunity.
I'm getting goosebumps right now.
Yeah.
Like just the way that you're describing this.
And that's a microcosm of the world that I want to live in, to be honest. It's like the mission of Almabase is to make education more affordable. And I can't think of a better example than this, like, for a college that's doing this. Fun fact there is that the director of annual giving there, the fundraising person, now works with Almabase. He was a customer for a few years, but he's done amazing work. And now he's basically selling Almabase, his story to the rest of the world.
Very impressive.
So if you start Almabase all over again now, like what would you do? Anything different?
2022, Kalyan's just about to close his foundation. What would you do?
What would I do differently? I think I would focus a lot more on the need and size of the market as much as I focused on my passion. I mean, like, I think initially it was all like a passion project that I was thought of as a startup. So I would like be much more rational about like the way I would pick the market and things like that. So definitely with the US. The other thing I would do is I think like focus a lot more on getting the large logos, because what we did when we moved to the US is we started with the small logos because we just thought like it's a easy win, right? Like started with high schools, started with small colleges, etc. And it took us a long time to get like those really large logos, right? What I would do differently is I would basically go after the large logos upfront if I were to do it again.
Awesome. And what is your biggest peeve as a startup founder? Don't say CRM patient.
So I guess like, yeah, I mean, it's definitely CRM, but I think I also think a lot about like content, even though like we're not very heavily inbound driven. I feel like most companies write content from their perspective and not the customer's perspective, right? I think that's an area that I would definitely pick on as like a pet peeve of mine. Like I keep talking about this all the time internally as well. But I think companies tend to do like a lot about like themselves, not necessarily themselves, but from their point of view, as opposed to getting the customer's point of view into their content.
Yeah, that's just so. Just because we are at the end of the year and it's important everybody takes a break, and all standard founders also should take a break and start fresh again next year. I want to ask you, what's your favorite holiday destination?
So my favorite so far has been South Africa. So when my wife and I got married for our honeymoon, we went to a few places in South Africa. I love it both for, I mean, it has everything. It has the mountains, it has the beaches, it has the city, it has like, wildlife. So like, yeah, Johannesburg, Cape Town, all of those places are amazing.
So that's it for me. And Kalyan, thank you so much for being on the show. It was really, really great. It was good to connect again and share all those stories. It was only place James Groves, and now it's for everyone. And hope this episode was really helpful for everyone. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. So thank you once again.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. See you guys.